sexy guys do. Explore what's all in their minds. Yeah, about a thing or two, about a thing or two, about a thing or two. Mansplaining is deciding you're gonna search for the truth. Mansplain me, baby. Mansplain. There can be no taking back would be uncool.
Welcome to Mansplaining, a podcast about the interesting things you can discover if you just take the time to learn. My name is Joe. I'm your host for this week, and as always, I'm joined by my college friend Mark. Together, we'll explore what's on our minds and hopefully figure out a thing or two about a thing or two. Mark, this podcast over the years has been many things, but one thing I think it has not been is practical advice about everyday here and now type of things.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I think we've done a lot of explorations of history and technology and science and culture and a lot of like really interesting big picture issues. But today we're going to go a little more small bore and in the realm of what I think is going to turn out to be, for me and our listeners, practical advice.
Yeah.
And it's inspired by all these recent warnings I've been reading and hearing about how gas stoves are dangerous and they need to be replaced. And it just seems like it came out of nowhere. I guess the warnings have been coming for a few years now, but when they first arrived, they came out of nowhere, and I kind of put them in the back of my mind. But they are persistent warnings, and so this is something I've been meaning to look into myself for a while because of the setup in my own kitchen, which we may get into during this episode. But for now, I put the question to you. I actually put 3 questions to you, and I want to repeat them just to tee this up for you. So if cooking with gas is so unsafe, how did gas stoves come to be so common in the first place? So the history of the gas stove is something I'm wondering about. And why are we only hearing about their dangers now that so many people in America and all over the world have them installed? And then how dangerous is the threat to our health of continuing to use gas stoves for the many of us who've had them for years and for whom it would be very difficult and expensive to replace them?
Sure.
So those are the questions I put to you, and I'm really interested to hear your answer. And as I said at the top, I think this is going to be really informative and helpful for all of our listeners, not just me.
Well, let me just repeat back something you just said, which is that these warnings have been coming for the last few years. I want to hold on to that phrase, the last few years, because there will be an ironic twist later in this episode. So with that as foregrounding.
All right, great.
So the history of the gas stove in America begins with natural gas itself. And I got pretty far into researching this episode before I realized that despite the fact that I've heard the term natural gas thousands of times, I wasn't sure exactly what it is. So let's take care of the basics.
Yeah, I mean, it could be construed as farting, could it not?
It's related. Yeah, they're cousins at the very least.
Yeah.
But technically speaking, natural gas is a fossil fuel composed primarily of methane. And of course, methane is a big component of farts, which formed from the remains of plants and animals buried over millions of years. It is extracted from underground rock formations and is typically transported through a system of pipelines for use in electricity generation, heating, cooking, and industrial processes. In the early days of the fossil fuel industry, natural gas was considered a hazard. It's quite flammable, so it represented a safety risk if you were drilling for oil. And the technology for capturing and transporting it hadn't really been developed yet, so for decades it was simply vented into the atmosphere or burned off. In the late 18th and early 19th century, though, manufactured gas from coal became popular for lighting homes and streets, and this set the stage for the use of natural gas as a fuel source. In 1885, the invention of the Bunsen burner demonstrated how natural gas could be mixed with air to produce a clean, adjustable flame, which made it viable for cooking and heating buildings.
I remember the Bunsen burner from middle school and high school science labs. I wonder if they still use them.
It seems to be iconic that you just refer to a Bunsen burner and you don't need to explain what that is. So I do believe it's still in use.
Yeah.
The first practical uses of natural gas came in locations where the gas was naturally venting from the ground. For instance, the first American use of natural gas came in Fredonia, New York. If you've never heard of Fredonia, take a drive from Cleveland to Buffalo and you'll pass through Fredonia on the way. In 1821, an industrious Fredonia resident named William Hart set up a well and a system of wooden pipes to deliver gas from a natural seep to homes for lighting. This was well ahead of its time. It was several decades before advances in metalworking, welding techniques, and pipe making made possible the construction of long-distance, high-pressure pipelines for the transport of natural gas from production fields to commercial markets and industrial centers. In the early 1800s, in fact, families were mostly relying on wood or coal stoves to cook their food to heat their homes, and those stoves required almost constant attention. Gas offered a superior alternative. The first person to patent a gas stove was James Sharp, an English inventor who secured his patent in 1826, and 10 years later he opened a factory to manufacture these new appliances. With his newfangled stove, cooks could simply turn a knob and get a steady, controlled flame. When not in use, you simply turned it off. It was a significantly more simple solution than what had been the standard before.
And can I just say about wood and coal being the precursors to gas stoves? We think gas stoves are dangerous, but imagine having a coal stove in your home. I guess people would get black lung disease, right, from having coal so close to their living quarters. I'm guessing.
It's possible, but it was not that long ago that was a pretty standard practice. You can still find homes today that have a chute in the back for the deposit of coal into their basement receptacle. So yeah, probably down there in the basement, there might be a fair amount of coal dust floating in the air, and black lung could potentially be an issue if you spend a lot of time there. And I don't think coal is particularly known as being clean burning, so it definitely came with its costs.
Yeah, I guess my point there is that even though it's verboten today, gas may have been thought of as a cleaner way to cook when it first came into existence a couple centuries ago.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're getting to that soon. The gas stove didn't hit the mainstream until a celebrity chef took it under his wing. There was a famous French chef in London named Alexis Soyer, working at the prestigious Reform Club. In 1841, he converted his entire kitchen to gas on the principle that it was more efficient and cheaper to operate, since the fuel could be shut off immediately when not needed. In 1850, Soyer staged a spectacular public demonstration at the Royal Agricultural Show at Exeter, where he used a gas stove to roast 535 pounds of beef in under 5 hours. His public stunt became a sensation, and James Sharp's invention started to be called, quote, the magic stove, unquote. The gas stove's new reputation carried into London's Great Exhibition in 1851, a 5-month celebration of technological progress, and by the 1860s, gas stoves had become common in English kitchens. Over in America, meanwhile, gas stoves were taking longer to catch on. Americans were deeply attached to their wood and coal stoves, and many people wondered whether cooking with gas would change how their food tasted. A question that lingers to this day, I might add, among people who argue that wood-fired ovens give us superior flavor to baked goods.
Yes.
Baltimore, Maryland had become the first American city to light its streets with gas lamps in 1816, and among Americans, gas was widely considered to be fuel for lighting and too expensive for cooking. A bigger problem than public perception, though, was infrastructure. As we discussed in the episode on high-speed rail, America is much, much bigger than European nations, and so things like natural gas needed to be transported over much larger distances. It wasn't until the 20th century that breakthroughs in technology, including new methods in steel fabrication and welding and the invention of compressor stations, made long-distance transport of natural gas commercially feasible. In 1931, the first 1,000-mile pipeline was completed, stretching from gas fields in Amarillo, Texas to Chicago, and this marked the beginning of a modern, interconnected pipeline network. World War II provided a boost to the development of these pipelines, with the famous Big Inch and Little Big Inch pipelines built to support wartime manufacturing efforts. All told, thousands of miles of pipeline were constructed, And after the war, these pipelines were converted to transport natural gas from Texas to the Northeast. And before we get to gas in the kitchen, here's a natural gas fun fact. In its natural form, natural gas is odorless. But ever since 1937, just after an explosion in Texas that killed nearly 300 people, an odor has been artificially added to the gas during processing so that you will notice a gas leak before it becomes deadly.
Wow, that's really interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's a foul odor, so it is pretty noticeable.
Yeah, and intentionally so. And can you imagine the hazard of having a gas stove in your home where you would not be able to smell a gas leak until it had filled a room and could be ignited with a match, a candle, or just some sort of spark?
Wow, I'm glad you gave that fact. That's really interesting.
So with the infrastructure problem solved, you might have thought that everything was coming up roses for natural gas. But there was a new problem called electricity. In the 1930s, electric stoves were quite popular, and gas companies needed a good marketing plan if they were going to overcome electricity's advantages. Gas companies launched a sustained, aggressive campaign to convince Americans that gas stoves were the way to go. In fact, the term natural gas itself was part of this initial campaign. It was chosen over alternatives like associated gas or just plain methane to give the impression that gas was clean, wholesome, and superior to other fossil fuels like coal. One advertisement from 1934 proclaimed that gas was, quote, nature's perfect fuel, unquote. So that's a callback to your point about natural gas being cleaner than coal. That was a centerstone of the original marketing campaign.
Right, and I'm also quite surprised that electric stoves were available nearly 100 years ago. I thought that was a relatively recent invention. So I'm curious whether the original electric stoves had the coils that they do today.
Didn't do the research on that, but it is an interesting fact of natural gas's history is that they had to try to overcome the early advantage of the electric stove, which caught on a little bit sooner.
Right.
By the 1920s and 30s, gas stoves were also transforming from bulky utility items into stylish kitchen appliances. The introduction of the cabinet range introduced stoves with a lower profile and streamlined look that blended seamlessly with countertops and other kitchen furniture. And manufacturers were producing stoves with enameled porcelain finishes, which were far easier to clean than old cast iron models. It was also in the 30s that the industry adopted one of the most successful advertising slogans in American history, the phrase, "Now you're cooking with gas." This phrase was meant to suggest that anything done with gas was modern and efficient, superior to every alternative. Gas executives saw to it that the phrase would appear everywhere, in Bob Hope comedy routines, in Disney cartoons, and throughout popular media.
Gosh, Ma, why are you divorcing me?
Well, we've been married 50 years, and you ain't never kissed me.
Well, I told you I was bashful.
But you ain't never held my hand yet. Gee, ain't you had no experience?
Nope, I was brought up in a one-horse town. Some other fellow owned the horse.
Well, I don't care. I'm going to get a divorce and start living. I'm going to sing and dance and stay out late nights. Yep. I'm going to cook with gas.
Yeah, you're through cooking. You're ready for basting.
The slogan became so embedded in American culture that people still use it today. The marketing became even more sophisticated in the 50s and 60s. Advertisements targeted housewives with endorsements by glamorous celebrities. One prominent 1964 campaign featured movie star Marlene Dietrich declaring, quote, "Every recipe I give is closely related to cooking with gas," while noting that cooking on an electric stove was, quote, "not a happy union," unquote. In the 1960s, though, a new note entered the natural gas marketing. A new $1 million campaign was launched by the American Gas Association with the title, I kid you not, Operation Attack, which was designed to promote gas stoves while also downplaying emerging science that in-home gas stoves carried health risks, which we'll be going to in depth later on. And the campaigns worked. Gas stoves came to be widely associated with sophistication, class, and professional class culinary skill. In September of 1970, however, a government advisory panel asked the gas industry to take a look at what they called the nitrogen oxides problem. Nitrogen oxides being a family of poisonous gases produced during combustion of natural gas. And 2 years later, in 1972, the American Gas Association drafted a report for the National Industrial Pollution Control Council The report included a section that discussed indoor air pollution concerns, including carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides. The draft also mentioned projects that were in the works to develop devices to limit these pollutants in household air.
Okay.
So that's the irony that I referred to at the top of this episode. You talk about warnings coming out in the last few years. The warnings actually emerged in the late 60s and early 70s, 50 years ago.
Yeah, this is a key point because it just seems unconscionable to me that this was swept under the rug 55 years ago and only reemerged quite recently.
Mm-hmm. So in the final version of that report that was published in August of 1972, that section on indoor air quality had been scrubbed. The published report instead argued that natural gas's primary drawback was not its environmental or health impacts, but rather its limited availability. Meanwhile, the industry was lobbying for a massive expansion of gas-based infrastructure. By removing health concerns from public reports in 1972, the industry dodged regulatory scrutiny from agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Internal industry documents show that the gas industry wasn't just aware of the pollution problem, they were actively testing solutions. A 1975 paper from AGA Laboratories updated research on emission measurements and discussed a prototype range top designed to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, which suggests that the industry understood the severity of the problem and knew that product safety changes or ventilation requirements might be necessary. However, their active suppression of the science created a regulatory vacuum that lasted for decades, and this allowed gas stoves to spread through millions of American homes without adequate safety standards.
Wow. And there was no whistleblower the entire time, too.
Right, yeah. The gas industry's response to health concerns has been compared to tactics used by big tobacco. Starting in 1972, the AGA began sponsoring its own epidemiological studies through a private lab that had also worked for tobacco companies. These industry-funded studies generally found no association between gas stoves and respiratory illness, contrary to independent research showing that there were positive associations. Crucially, the AGA's funding for some influential studies was not disclosed in independent scientific journals. When published in journals like Environmental Research, readers had no way of knowing the research was paid for by the gas industry. The industry even hired the same public relations firm that had helped tobacco companies, Hill & Knowlton. This firm advised the gas industry to mount massive, consistent, long-range public relations programs to deal with critics. The goal was to manufacture controversy around the science, creating doubt in the public's mind even as evidence mounted.
Wow. It's so much the big tobacco playbook, right? Lie, deny,
Yeah.
fund fake research, spend tons of money on lobbying and PR. It's just unbelievable parallels there.
Right, particularly that the two were marching in lockstep at the same time and using the same PR agency.
Yeah.
They could not have been closer partners in this.
So maybe not unbelievable then, right?
Right.
Entirely believable.
This influence campaign successfully obstructed regulatory action at the CPSC and EPA for 40 years. By highlighting potential confounding factors like socioeconomic status or family history of allergies, industry-funded research argued that links between gas stoves and health problems were merely correlation, not direct causation. And this misinformation campaign was a brilliant success. In the 1970s, less than 30% of new single-family American homes had gas stoves, but by 2019, about 50% were being built with gas stoves. And today, approximately 40 million U.S. households cook with gas stoves in well over 70% of homes in populous cities.
Including mine. And yours too, Mark?
No, we're on electric, but I certainly have had gas stoves in the past. Despite industry denials, the science is pretty clear. The health impacts from gas stoves include the following. First, the release of nitrogen dioxide. This is a respiratory irritant created when the high heat of gas flame causes nitrogen and oxygen in the air to react. Just a few minutes of gas stove use in a kitchen without proper ventilation can cause indoor nitrogen dioxide levels to exceed EPA standards for outdoor air.
Wow.
That is to say, pollutant levels high enough to trigger government intervention if detected outside are regularly occurring inside millions of American kitchens.
That's scary.
Second, childhood asthma. A major 2022 study estimated that 12.7% of current childhood asthma cases in the United States are attributable to gas stove use.
Wow.
The study found that children living in homes with gas stoves are 42% more likely to have asthma. To put this in perspective, the asthma risk from gas stoves is similar in magnitude to the risk you get from secondhand tobacco smoke.
Wow.
Then there's benzene exposure. Gas stove combustion releases benzene, a known human carcinogen linked to leukemia and other blood cell cancers. A 2023 study found that using gas stoves can raise indoor benzene levels higher than secondhand cigarette smoke would, and children are particularly vulnerable. They inhale more benzene per body weight than adults, and their cancer risk from gas stove-related benzene exposure is nearly double that of adults. And benzene doesn't stay in the kitchen. It drifts through a home to bedrooms and living spaces. Bedrooms actually showed the highest associated health risk from benzene emissions because people spend so much of their time there. This means even family members who aren't actively cooking are being exposed to the gas. Gas stoves also leak methane, a potent greenhouse gas, even when they're turned off. About 80% of methane emissions from gas stoves occur when the stoves are off due to small leaks in gas lines and fittings. A 2022 study estimated that methane leaking from U.S. gas stoves has a climate impact comparable to the annual carbon dioxide emissions of 500,000 cars.
Wow.
And then the final health risk comes from carbon monoxide, which is produced by incomplete combustion of natural gas. In homes with malfunctioning stoves or inadequate ventilation, carbon monoxide can build to dangerous or even lethal levels. Despite voluntary industry safety standards, approximately 60,000 gas stoves were recalled in 2022 and 2023 after being found to emit dangerous levels of carbon monoxide.
And unlike that treated gas you were talking about a few minutes ago, carbon monoxide is odorless and colorless, so it's a sneaky killer.
Yeah, good point. These health risks are not distributed equally. Pollution levels are significantly higher in smaller homes of less than 800 square feet, where residents can face 4 times as much the long-term nitrous dioxide exposure compared to those in larger homes. Studies show that exposure rates are disproportionately high for certain communities. 60% higher for Native American and Alaska Native households, and 20% higher for Black and Hispanic or Latino households compared to the national average. And that's been a recurrent theme, hasn't it, Joe, in this podcast? Whenever we're talking about something bad, it's always worse for people of color.
Yes, I was just thinking that very thing.
As you may remember, in January 2023, gas stoves were at the center of one of our periodic culture wars. A member of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission mentioned in an interview that the agency was considering regulating gas stoves due to health concerns and that they hadn't rolled out a total ban. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Members of Congress posted defiant social media messages, with some promising that no one would take their gas stoves from, quote, their cold, dead hands.
The Charlton Heston playbook.
Yes, exactly, which links gas stoves not just to tobacco, but also to the NRA.
Yes.
The CPSC chair quickly clarified that no ban was imminent, but the controversy refused to die down, as our controversies today tend not to. The industry deliberately fanned the flames, framing the issue as government overreach and attack on consumer freedom rather than a public health concern. And in fact, the gas industry today is still fighting the battle that started in the 70s. Today's tactics have multiple facets. First, there's political lobbying. Gas utilities have successfully lobbied for laws in over 20 states that prevent local cities from establishing cleaner building codes or restricting gas connections in new construction. The first state to produce such a law was Arizona in 2020, but now that list includes Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, West Virginia, and Wyoming. So we're talking nearly half the country at this point where the gas industry has successfully lobbied for laws that prevent restrictions on the use of gas stoves in new construction.
It sounds kind of Orwellian to me, Mark. And I do believe you rattled off that list pretty fast, but those are mostly, if not entirely, red states. So I guess I'm not surprised by that because My own state of New York is going in kind of the opposite direction. I think there was a law passed a couple of years ago and a ban that's either in place or about to take place where new construction cannot use any gas stoves in my home state of New York.
Yeah, I'm reviewing the list that I gave to you. And in fact, every single one of the states that I listed there went for Donald Trump in the most recent election. So I think you are on the right track in thinking that these are red states, definitely suspicious of progressive and populist city-driven initiatives.
Yeah. This sounds like a continuation of the culture war, like they're banning hamburgers, They're banning cows. This sounds like it's of a piece with that kind of fever swamp conspiracy theorizing.
Right, yeah, I'd agree. The second tactic is astroturfing, otherwise known as creating fake grassroots support. PR firms working for gas utilities have been caught creating anonymous posts on social media platforms like Nextdoor to warn residents about gas bins and promote gas stoves' supposedly superior cooking quality. These campaigns are designed to look like concerned neighbors sharing opinions rather than paid industry advocacy. A third tactic is influencer marketing. Trade groups like the American Public Gas Association have hired social media influencers to promote gas stoves to millennials and Gen Xers. This content often features trendy Instagram chefs or polished lifestyle pages promoting appliances while failing to mention health risks or the need for ventilation. A 2022 survey found that nearly 3/4 of consumers received no information about potential pollution and health risks when purchasing gas stoves from retailers, and 2/3 weren't told about the need for good ventilation. And then there's the old favorite, attacking the science. When confronted with studies linking gas stoves to childhood asthma, the AGA launched a barrage of attacks, calling their research, quote, misleading and unsupported, unquote. They cite competing meta-analyses, studies, as we've already discussed, that were paid for by the industry, and dismiss claims that emissions exceed safety standards as, quote, patently false, unquote. The industry argues that this all should be just a matter of consumer choice and positions health advocates as part of a, quote, misguided agenda, unquote, trying to remove consumer energy choice. This strategy explicitly politicizes a public health issue and once again calls out agenda as the four-letter word of our time, that anything that can be tied to an agenda must be evil.
Yes, right. Gas stoves don't kill people. People kill people.
We have people using gas stoves, yeah. Much like people using guns. Driven by both health and climate concerns, however, a growing number of cities have passed policies to phase out gas connections in new construction, favoring all-electric buildings. Los Angeles, your own New York City, according to my data, and dozens of other municipalities have adopted such measures. My own city of Seattle allows gas stoves in new construction, but it requires gas appliances to meet the same energy efficiency standards as electrical stoves, which means higher costs for developers, which are passed on to residents as higher unit costs. My wife and I have been touring townhouses for sale over the last year, and I do see gas stoves in quite a few of those units, so I'm not sure how effective Seattle's deterrent is in practice. At the federal level, the political response to these state and local policies has been fierce. In 2023, the U.S. House of Representatives passed H.R. 1615, the, quote, Gas Stove Protection and Freedom Act, unquote, Gas Stove Freedom Uber alles, designed to prohibit the use of federal funds to ban or regulate gas stoves. The bill's title itself reflects how successfully the industry has reframed the issue. It's about freedom, not health.
Because after all, Mark, if you can't make your freedom fries on a gas stove, then what kind of country is this?
And there's nothing more American than giving your kids asthma.
Yep.
Like that was the founding fathers had that in mind when they wrote the Constitution. This political battle ensures that the future of gas cooking in America remains intensely contested. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 offers rebates to help homeowners purchase electric appliances, which would make the switch more affordable. And modern induction cooktops are increasingly recognized as superior alternatives by experts, offering faster heating, more precise control, and easier cleanup than both gas and traditional electric stoves. In one New York City pilot study, participants who switched from gas to induction were nearly unanimous in their positive feedback, citing ease, speed, and safety. However, gas stoves still have powerful advantages in the marketplace. They work during power outages. They're what many people grew up with, and decades of marketing have created entrenched personal preference. Gas stoves will likely remain common for at least another generation.
Yes. Attention mansplaining listeners. If you want to engage with Mark and me, you have some options. One is to go to our Facebook page, Mansplaining the Podcast, where you can leave a comment or question, check our sources, suggest topics for future episodes, or just like us, because who doesn't want to be liked? You can also reach us through whatever app you use to listen to this podcast by giving us a 5-star rating or writing a review of your favorite episode. Or you can call and leave us a message on our dedicated voicemail box, which is 206-486-4074. And did you know that you can now listen to full episodes of Mansplaining on YouTube and check out our podcast music on Spotify? Yep, it's true. Just type Mansplaining Podcast into the search bar on either platform and you'll find us. It's lonely in podcast land, and we welcome and appreciate any feedback you might want to share. Act now, and we'll throw in a set of Ginsu knives. Not really.
So, Joe, I know you have a gas stove, and I'm sure many of our listeners do too. And there are steps they can take to reduce exposure to harmful pollutants. While these measures can't eliminate all risk, especially from cancer-causing benzene, they can significantly lower your exposure. First, ventilation is critical. Always run your range hood on its highest setting when cooking, starting before you light the burner and continuing a few minutes after. If possible, use a hood that vents outside rather than recirculating air through filters. Recirculating hoods are far less effective. Cook on back burners when you can, as they're better captured by the hood. Keep the hood clean and filters maintained, and supplement with open windows to create cross ventilation, especially if you lack outdoor venting. A HEPA air purifier in or near the kitchen can help capture particulates. When possible, use lower heat and gentler cooking methods, which both reduce emissions. And finally, install and regularly test carbon monoxide alarms.
Well, I'm coming up short on many of those metrics, Mark, I must say. So my small galley kitchen in my New York City apartment has a vent fan, but it is that closed system that you called recirculating. It doesn't vent outside. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be typical for New York City apartments, since most kitchens are nowhere near the window. So I don't see how you could possibly vent them outside. So I suspect I'm not alone in that deficiency. Right. But then, like you mentioned, recirculating fans are better than nothing, right? But they're basically there to like trap grease and reduce odors. They don't do much in the way of eliminating harmful gases. So I suspect my apartment is one of those you mentioned earlier that's full of high benzene readings, even in the bedroom. And it's scary hearing this, you know, but I guess it kind of raises the question, what the hell can we do? You've introduced these mitigation strategies, but the prime culprit is the gas stove in the home. And short of getting rid of that gas stove, you're just tinkering around the edges, it seems to me. I mean, do you agree or disagree?
Well, you can run an air purifier. That's one thing that you can bring in. With a HEPA filter in there, it would be cutting down on your exposures, but it's one more appliance that you'd have to have running, almost all day long, probably.
Right.
Because it's not actively over the stovetop. It's definitely a tricky situation. In winter months, you're not going to want to have the window open to vent stuff out because it would be too cold, the air coming in. So I think it's just do what you can. I'm sure probably replacing your stove is economically not feasible. And I don't know if you have a hot water heater that's also gas powered. That would be the same scenario for that one too.
And you mentioned the CO detector, carbon monoxide. My building recently installed natural gas alarms in the kitchen of every apartment in my complex, and I believe that's in compliance with a local New York City law that was responding to some like gas explosions in New York City. But I don't think a natural gas alarm is an alarm for carbon monoxide. I think those are two different things. So
no, you're right. The natural gas alarm is different from the carbon monoxide alarm. The natural gas alarm is primarily set up to track methane, though it also checks for things like propane, butane, and ethane. So it's kind of a supplement to the carbon monoxide alarm in that it's just there in case there's a buildup which you haven't already noticed because of the scent that you need to do something about it, like open a window
Right.
or turn on the air purifier.
yeah, opening a window is another important thing that one can do whenever it's feasible.
Mm-hmm. The gas stove started as a breakthrough innovation, a magic stove that freed families from the drudgery of tending coal and wood fires. And it seemed to represent real progress in its time, but its eventual dominance in American kitchen came less from consumer demand than from infrastructure economics and decades of persistent marketing. The steady blue flame that once signaled progress and modernity now poses difficult questions about the air we breathe, the health of our children, the companies that try to manipulate public opinion,
Yes.
and the interests that our public policies truly serve. I grew up in a house with a gas stove, and I've had gas stoves in various apartments throughout my adult life. I can remember catching the occasional whiff of gas that told me the pilot light had gone out, which told me that I needed to find a book of matches and get down on my hands and knees to relight it. I can't remember ever really thinking about the fact that the gas I was smelling was probably toxic. I have an electric stove now, and having done this research, I can't see ever going back.
Yeah, I don't blame you one bit. And I would just add to your sum up at the end there, persistent marketing and persistent lying is part of the secret of their success over the years, the gas stove industry.
Indeed, indeed.
That's a very sobering portrait, and with a lot of practical advice that I think I was correct is going to be very useful, not only to me, but to all of our listeners. I have a couple stray thoughts I want to run by you. I didn't want to interrupt when you talked about electric stoves and induction cooktops as alternatives to gas. Just curious whether in your research you learned whether they have their own issues, side effects, secondary negative effects.
None that came up in my research. I don't think there's any miracle cure. There's no solution to every problem. But I feel like electric on a number of different metrics just comes in as less harmful overall in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of internal health risks.
Yes.
I mean, maybe that's a future episode, like what's the dark side of electric stoves? But so far, I believe that that's just the safer alternative.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a chef, so I don't have that critique of how good the cooking is on an electric stove. The only downside I see of electric stoves is they get pretty freaking hot, and a lot of people burn their hands on that dark glass stovetop because they don't realize that it's 200 degrees.
Right, yeah.
But I believe that problem is solved with induction cooktops.
Indeed it is, because the way induction cooktops work is that it only produces heat where the metal of the pot or the pan is in contact with the surface, which is why certain types of pans don't work on induction stoves. Like I don't think aluminum pans actually work in induction. So in that you have the advantage of you could have a induction burner, quote unquote, on and place your hand on it and feel no heat, but you put a pot on there and the pot gets hot, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I currently have the less accomplished electric stove. I have the glass top, but there is just a standard electric burner directly beneath that. So like you say, it stays hot after I finish cooking.
Right.
And so there's little red lights on the top of the stove that you have to pay a lot of attention to because it tells you which parts of the stove might burn you.
Oh, at least there's a red light. That's progress. So here's another thing I was thinking, and again, I didn't want to interrupt you in the flow of your presentation, but you talked about the cultural resistance to gas in the early days, 19th century into the early 20th century, and then you talked about the culture war that started about gas stoves much more recently. One thing you did not discuss is a lot of chefs swear by gas stoves.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm on pretty safe ground saying that. And I find it ironic that today there's a cultural resistance, at least among chefs, to non-gas cooking, which kind of bookends the cultural resistance to gas cooking that Americans felt 100 or 200 years ago.
Yeah, I thought a lot about that, which I was aware of. And there is one context in which you could argue that a gas burner is superior for cooking. And that's if you're cooking with something like a wok, where you don't just want the bottom of the pot to be heated. You want the heat to go up like around the entire curved surface of the pot.
Yeah.
And in that case, you have a better shot at it with a gas flame that's licking up around the edges of the pot. Outside of that, I think it's just that's what they cut their teeth on. You know, that's what the chefs that they really respect used in their cooking. That's what they used when they were learning to cook.
Right.
And it's what they're comfortable with. It's what they associate professional cooking with, as opposed to in-home cooking where you're just, like using some dinky electric stove. But I do believe that opinions are going to change on that, because induction does present a lot of advantages in terms of instantaneous heat and control, like very fine-grained control of the amount of heat that you're putting out. And so I think probably professional chefs' minds will change on that. But considering that many of them are still cooking with goose fat, that's not a population that changes its mind rapidly.
Yes. And what you just said made me think again of climate change and like cars going from, gas guzzlers to electric cars, and people are wedded to their gas guzzlers, but eventually as they get replaced and the tradition ends, you move on. So I think your prediction is correct that the professional food culinary establishment will move away from gas because they have to.
Right.
I have one last thing, and I hate to end on such a dark note, but this whole presentation kind of begs the question of how many years of our lives have we taken off by just being around gas stoves for much of our lives. And I'm still in a very enclosed kitchen, with no ventilation, no HEPA filter, although that might change soon. And I just wonder how much have I taken off my own life? Do you wonder the same thing? And is it something we should think existentially about?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to really quantify something like that. I tend to think of things sort of holistically in that regard, that yes, I probably have taken some off my life with my sloppy eating habits. But on the other hand, I've never smoked a cigarette, Right. So like you take things like that and you weigh them against each other, like for an overall lifetime choice. And then I think the last refuge is none of these things are deterministic, right? It's just increasing a risk. Like instead of rolling a 100-sided die, and if it comes up, 3 or lower, then you get cancer. It's rolling the same die. If it comes up 5 or below, you get a cancer. And your risk did go up, but it could be that the odds are still in your favor. And so I think at some point it'd be nice for us to do an episode on just thinking about probability, because we do tend to overestimate risk. Like an increased risk doesn't necessarily mean that it's a sentence of death if the risk is going from 1% to 2%.
Yes.
In that case, the risk doubled, but it's still quite low.
Yeah, all true. I can't argue with any of that. I will only say that the choice of whether to smoke a cigarette is entirely yours, right? But the choice whether to have a gas range in your home was made by other people.
Yeah.
And from your presentation through basically lying and subterfuge is how they got that gas range in your apartment or your home. And you have much less of a choice unless you're independently wealthy and can just take out the gas range, which I can't do.
Yeah, that's a good point. Generally speaking, no one has been forced to start smoking cigarettes. However, if you rent in a big city, there's a good chance that you've spent some years of your life using a gas stove because that was what was in the unit that you rented.
Yes.
And you didn't have a whole lot of choice in that matter.
Right.
And that can be rage-inducing if you think about the fact that the industry knew about the risks by, at the latest, 1972.
Right.
And 53 years later, they're still denying the risks. 53 years later. So that's not just one executive who's consistent. Like generations of gas company executives have continued the policy of deny everything.
Yes.
Knowing that it's killing people.
Yes. And you and I are older than 53 years, but not much older. And it basically the vast majority of our lifetimes spent in that situation. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Well, that's a dark way to end, but that's where my mind went after hearing your presentation. Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. This was really, really informative, and I think it's going to change my daily life. And I'm going to talk to my wife about getting the HEPA filter for sure, mm-hmm. and doing other common sense things like keeping the window open when I'm cooking, as long as it's not freezing outside.
Yeah.
And, using the vent fan on max and cooking on the back burners whenever possible. Those are all really practical things we can do to mitigate the risk in our own lives. And I for one, am going to do those things.
Okay, that's great. I hope it makes a positive difference.
So give me the question for next time.
Yeah, well, you talked just a little while ago about our minds going to places. And so I thought, let's send our minds to a crazy wild place, which is, I'm interested in psychedelics. Psychedelics had their first popularity spurt in the early 70s. But then there was a huge crackdown, both in national policy and in popular opinion against psychedelics. But lately, psychedelics are enjoying a comeback. They've been legalized in a few states. But my question pertains to therapeutic uses for mental health issues. And I'm super interested in the current thinking around how psychedelics can help with things like trauma and depression. And really, if we can get into it, what's the science to that? Like, why do they work? So I'd love to have a discussion about that once you've gone into the world of crazy psychedelics and come back with some answers.
Interesting question, but I'm probably not going to ingest any psychedelics in researching. I'll tell you right up front. Though I did take psychedelics in an earlier part of my life, I'm not likely to do that this time. I hope that's not a disappointment to you, Mark.
It does pose the opportunity for us to do the next episode on psychedelics, but I agree with you that would probably not make for very good audio.
Right. Okay, well, that's my task for next time, and I will get to work on that. And it sounds like a really interesting conversation for us to have in a few weeks. In the meantime, mansplaining listeners, I want you to dig the latest sounds from our Red Hot Mansplaining House Band. And Mark and I are going to go away for now, but we will talk to you next time.
See you then.
She loves a shiny Ranger, says blue flame cooks clean. He smiles for the camera, that smell, it's green. They're running ads on TikTok, we're a gas cooking tribe. No mention of the data, that stuff kills the vibe. Kitchen's warm, the burners glow, little lungs don't need to know. Mom's stirring pasta, TV says it's free. You're cooking with nature, says the gas company. Yeah. The lobby's in a panic, the studies hit the press, and academic papers calling it an endo mess. They spin it like a romance, natural love, not fear. Forget the carbon footprint, light the burner, dear. The EPA keeps knocking, the CEOs keep talking. It's correlation, not causation. A slogan's their salvation. Don't breathe so close to me. There's methane all up in our revelry. The nitrogen and CO2. They love you, baby, and they'll gas you too. Don't breathe so close to me. It's just a bit of kitchen chemistry. Those fumes, they drift so casually, like the industry did in 73. Yeah. They sponsor school field trips, ignite curiosity. The mascot's name is Sparky. It's clean energy.
Mansplaining is brought to you by Joe and Mark and nobody else. Music composed and performed by the Mansplaining House Band. Thank you for spending your time with us, and we'll see you next time.